All right, so we'll say good morning. Let us begin a beautiful daf ahead of us today. Begin by thanking our sponsors, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors, Yoel and Sarah Kelman, for dedicating all the shiurim and drashas this month. In this chus of learning in shiurim, that Baruch Hashem come out of our kehila, our daf yomi sponsors today, Richard and Lauren Simon, in memory of Lauren's grandfather, Avram Tzvi ben Moshe Zachariah Levi, who survived the Holocaust and risked his life to keep his tefillin with him throughout the war. Incredible, and continued to live his life dedicated to Torah and mitzvahs. It is an incredible zechus to dedicate the daf and to learn in the merit of such a special neshama. His neshama should have an aliyah and his family a nechama. And of course, we dedicate our learning in the zechus of Refuah Shlema for Aviva Bas Sheina Chana, and in the zechus of Refuah Shlema for Rachel Yehudis Bas Tova Gittel. And also with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. A lot to do today. Today's daf is Pei Beis 82. We are picking up on Pei Aleph on Beis 81b. 81b. So let us begin. We are picking up actually a little bit before the two dots. I kind of left you on a little bit of a cliffhanger yesterday because what we were trying to understand in the Mishnah, we had this idea of essentially pre-purchasing in a partnership in a shituf or in an eruv. It doesn't really matter, but the case over here, it frames it really in the form of a shituf or an eruv. So as I said, what's the idea? Remember, just a very, very quick reorientation. I go over to the chenveni. We all live in the same mavoi. So I go over. One of the residents of the mavoi happens to be a shopkeeper. I know what's going to end up happening is we're going to make a shituf, and he's going to provide the barrel of wine. I figure, you know what? One of my kabbalas for the new year is to be a bit more zoriz. So I decide, I want to work on my zvizos. So I'm going to go over to him. I say, here's $10. Here is my chelik in the wine. So beautiful, except, at least while machlokis over here, Rabbi Eliezer says it works. Chachamim say it doesn't work. Now, Chachamim, I understand. Why doesn't it work? So we spoke about yesterday, Abosai, doesn't work because ma'os einon konos, because you can't acquire movable property with money. And the problem over here is you're trying to purchase a chelik in wine, ultimately, again, because with money. It doesn't work. So we'll say, you'll say, but what's the problem? So let the chenveni forget about the money. And we'll say, what is the chenveni going to do regarding all the other residents in the mavli? What is he going to do? He's going to be makne them a portion in the barrel of wine. So the same way that he's going to be makne them a portion of the barrel of wine, just let him be makne me a portion of the barrel of wine as well. It doesn't work because once I set up our relationship as a transactional one, so he's not going to go ahead and convert that ultimately again to a hakna'a one. So therefore I will say halacha l'maaseh, the Chum say it doesn't work. But yet Rabbi Eliezer says it does work. Gabi, thank you. It does work. So we'll say, so the Gemara says, but I don't understand. Why does it work? What are the mechanics of that it should work? So we'll say, so we left off. So Amar Shmuel bar Yitzchak. I'm sorry. No. We left off. V'Rav Ila Amrav Yochanan. Bedalit prakim elu. It's pretty much like in the middle of the page, right across to the Rabbeinu Chananel. Thank you. So the Gemara says, V'Rav Ila Amrav. Well, say by the way, before I forget, starting Sunday, Meretz Hashem, this entrance is not going to be open. We're just going to be entering through the regular doors. I keep on always forgetting to mention it, but as it gets colder, we're just going to use the regular entrance. Says the Gemara, I'm sorry. Rav Ila Amrav Yochanan b'dalet prakim elu hamidu chachamim divrein al divrei Torah. So we'll say what happened. The dalet prakim. So remember again, we mentioned this yesterday that there are 4 times throughout the year where everybody would buy meat. So therefore, what that meant is, under normal circumstances, if I'm a butcher, the only time I'm going to shecht an animal is when I have buyers for the whole animal. But there are 4 times throughout the year where Chazal said, even if you only get a very small order of meat, you have to shecht. And I will say what we saw is during those times, halacha l'maisa, when you go ahead and you pay for your order of meat, you've acquired your order. So the Gemara says, Dam Rabbi Yochanan, Dvar Torah ma'os konos. Both say it's actually very interesting. Midda oraisa, money does acquire metalton. I both say this is a fascinating transactional idea. On a biblical level, you could acquire movable property with money. That is the halacha. So we'll say, so why doesn't? So the Gemara says, why Rashi says over here, Dvar Torah ma'os konos tichsiv bepodem min hekdish v'nasan akesef ekamlo. Because where do we learn this out from? We learn this out from redemption of consecrated items. That if you want to redeem something that is consecrated, the pasuk says you shall give the money and it will become yours. So we'll say, interestingly enough, what we see from here is that in fact you can acquire things with money. So why, if the oraisa ma'os konos, Why did Chazal say it doesn't work? Watch this. Gzeira shemayomru lo nisrfu chitecha ba'aliyah. Chazal will say, what's the concern? The concern is if let's say, so it's a simple case. I go over to Reuven. Reuven sells wheat. And what happens? I purchase $1,000 of wheat. Okay, here's the problem. If I go ahead and I take title to it now, before ever taking physical possession, if a fire breaks out in Reuven's granary, he has no incentive to save my wheat. Right? Why does he have no incentive to save my wheat? Because Lamaisa, it's already mine. And whatever loss there is, it's my loss. So he has no incentive to safeguard my merchandise while it's in his position. So what did Chazal do? Chazal kind of shifted the onus. They said, Midrabanan ma'os einon konos. No. When I give Reuven $1,000 movable property, I don't acquire. Therefore, again, should a fire break out, ultimately, again, the loss occurs. It's his loss. So therefore, I will say what comes out over here, according to the Gemara, is that according to Rabbi Eliezer, essentially in the case of a shituf, Chazal suspended their halacha, and therefore the halacha goes back to the da'oraisa. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, he will say in the case of shituf, or the case of eruv, ma'os konos, money affects acquisition, and therefore when I give $10 to the chenveni, I in fact go ahead and acquire a chelik in the wine. The Chacham, on the other hand, say no, that is not the halacha. The only time we go back to the da'oraisa is where, in the very specific case of meat, 4 times a year. But otherwise, again, this case will not work. So I will say, so that's the fundamental machlokes, Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. Do we go ahead, and when it comes to shituf or eruv, do we go ahead and kind of frame the transaction in biblical terms, in which case money could acquire movable property, or do we say no? The only time we do that is by the dalit prakim, by the meat 4 times a year, but otherwise, again, this is a regular transaction as legislated by Chazal, and money cannot acquire. Chacham say regular transaction, Rabbi Eliezer saying treat it like meat 4 times a year. Fascinating. So Gemara goes right to Modi b'shar kol adam. So we'll remember again, and the Gemara says that they agree, the Chachamim agree, that if I give money to someone other than the chenveni, that I can acquire a portion of the eruv. Because they will say, if I give money to the chenveni, the understanding is that halacha l'maisa, I'm purchasing a chilik in the wine. If I give money to another person, so l'maisa, again, what I'm doing then is making that person my shaliach, and that works. So the Gemara says, man shar kol adam. What do you mean it's someone else? Amrav balabais, just another balabas in the mavoy. V'chin amar Shmuel balabais, damar Shmuel lo shano ela nachtum. The only time the Chachamim say that this relation is problematic is when you're giving money to the baker or to the shopkeeper and you're trying to acquire a purchase in a portion in the bread or in the wine. That's when transactionally it doesn't work. But if you give money to another member of the Chatzar or to the Mavui and you say, listen, do me a favor, when you get your portion in the Erev, get me a portion as well, then that works. Furthermore, again, it only works, it's only problematic even with a chenveni or with a nachtum, with the shopkeeper or the baker, when you're trying to purchase your chelik with money. Aval kli kona. But we'll say, interestingly enough, if you were to go ahead and use a utensil, Rashi points out the kinyan sudar. So you're not trying to acquire anything with money. Rather, you're trying to acquire something with another form of kinyan. That would actually work. Furthermore, Shmuel says it's only a problem even with the nachtum or the chenveni when you go ahead and you say, acquire from me a portion, because then you're buying something. But I will say it's actually very interesting. If you were to go over to the chenveni, you were going to go over to the baker, and you would say, listen, be my shaliach. That when you're working out the eruv, be my shaliach, work out for me also. That would work. So we'll say the problematic case according to the Chachamim is a very specific case where I'm trying to purchase some of the wine, or I'm trying to purchase some of the bread, because then I get into a situation ultimately again of money cannot acquire movable property. But again, if I vary that up, so I go ahead and I tell the baker or I tell the shopkeeper, be my shaliach, when you go ahead and take care of the Erev, take care of me also, that works totally fine. So the Gemara goes right to Amar Rabbi Yehuda ben Ramor. So Yehuda says, when is this true? And Rabbi Yehuda made a distinction by Erev Tchumen, right? So it's only by Erev Tchumen that you acquire the das, the knowledge of the person for whom you are making the Erev. But let's say by Erev Chatzeros, you could do it for someone even without their knowledge. So it says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel halach Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda said name Shmuel that the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda. V'lo od ella kol makom sheshan Rabbi Yehuda be'eruvin halacha kimoso. Not only that, but wherever Rabbi Yehuda espouses halacha and eruvin, the halacha always follows him. Amrli Rav Chana, so therefore again, remember Rabbi Yehuda is making this distinction that the only time you need the knowledge of people for Eruv is by Eruv Tchumen, which we spoke about. Why? Because Eruv Tchumen is not a schus necessarily, because whatever you gain in one direction, you lose in a different one. But let's say Eruv Chatzeros, which is an objective schus, you can make an Eruv on behalf of someone even without their knowledge. Now the Gemara says, whenever you quote Rabbi Yehuda in Eruvin, the halacha follows. Rabbi Chana Bagada told Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Afilu b'mavui shenitl karosa or lechayiv. Is that true? Rabbi say no. Rabbi Yehuda holds in the case of a mavui that was adjusted with a lechi or a kora, and then the lechi or kora was removed over Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda says the mavui still remains permitted. So the Gemara says, really, do we follow Rabbi Yehuda in that case also? Amrli be'eruvin amarti lecha v'lo b'mechitzas. No. I say we follow Rabbi Yehuda in cases of eruvin, not necessarily in cases of mechitzos. Not necessarily in cases of mechitzos. Amar Rav Acha Brei Rav Ashi halacha mechlal depligi. So we'll say if you're going to tell me the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda, that sounds like someone argues on him. So the Gemara says, V'amar Rav Yeshua ben Levi kamakom sham Rabbi Yehuda emasai ubameh. Yet Rabbi said we learned that any time Rabbi Yehuda introduces a halacha with emasai when, or the word bameh or bameh drar mamurim, that means Rabbi Yehuda is not arguing, but rather he's coming to explain. So in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda prefaces his statement with bameh drar mamurim. When is this so? Which sounds like he's not arguing on the chacham; he's explaining their words. So the Gemara says, "Avaha nantanan nitosfu alehen mosif umezakeh." But yet, Rabbi said the Mishnah does seem to indicate the machlokes about the case where there were additional residents, and then the individual in charge of the Eruv added on food. He has to tell the other residents. Rabbi said that was the source of machlokes. That was a unique case of a chatzar situated in between two mavuis. V'amra Rav Shizzi Amr Rav Chisda Zos Omeres Chalukin Alov Rachabeirav Al Rabbi Yehuda. But yet again, I will say, Rav Shizvi said in the name of Rav Chisda that Rabbi Yehuda does disagree with the Chachamim. So how can you position this as a case where there is no machlokas? Ella top of Pebeis Gavra Agavra Karamis Mar Savar Pligi Mar Savar Lo Pligi. Okay, I will say says machlokas. There's machlokas about if there's machlokas, right? So again, even though we have this cloud that in general, when Rabbi Yehuda says Bameh, he's coming to explain and not disagree. It appears that there's a machlokes. Do Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim agree in certain cases, or do they disagree? Fine. Gufra said, look at this sugya. This is fascinating. Amr Yeshua ben Levi, Komakom Sham Rabbi Yehuda Emasai Ubameh b'Mishnasenu. Anytime Rabbi Yehuda says Emasai when or Bameh Medra Murim. So ultimately, again, Eino El Lefashir Racham. He's only coming to explain the position of the Chachamim and not disagree. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees, and he says, Emasai lefarish, whenever he says Emasai is coming to explain, right? So which makes it Emasai is a qualifying word. So in other words, the Rabbanan will make their statement, and Rabbi Yehuda will say Emasai. When are the rabbi's words true? But he's coming to clarify the sheet of the Rabbanan, not coming to disagree. So Ubameh, but Bameh is lachlok. That ultimately again is when Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Is that true? Every time it says Emasai, Rabbi Yehuda is agreeing and explaining and not disagreeing. So also listen to this case. It's great. Elohena Poslin. Both said these are the individuals who are pasal le'edus. These are the individuals who are not permitted to go ahead and give any kind of testimony. So the Gemara says, who are they? Hamasachik Bakuvya, a gambler. Literally, again, it means someone who rolls dice. Melava beribis, someone who lends with interest. Mafriche yonim, ultimately, again, we'll say a pigeon racer. Right? Sochre shvius, and those people who do commerce with shmita produce. So I just want to point out, look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says, Psulin, why are these individuals puzzle for Eidos? Rashi says, Le'edos tekulan gazlanim edivrein, because they're all thieves. Dasmachta lokanya umigzal gazule. So I'll say, we'll talk about this. Asmachta lokanya means that sometimes hyperbolic statements are not binding. I will say, in general, the issue that comes up with gambling is that no one really has in mind to willingly part with their money. So because no one willingly parts with their money, as much as they give me their money when I win the hand, at the end of the day, they're not giving it willingly. Because not giving it willingly, in halacha l'maisa, that is a form of rabbinic theft. And that's the common denominator with all these. That's also malavi beribis, someone who charges interest. Again, the person parts with the extra money unwillingly, but l'maisa, again, listen, now you can make the taina, well, every time I pay a bill, I'm parting with the money unwillingly, right? But Lamaisa, again, remember, there's a difference between paying for a service, right, for something that you have to, no one likes to pay for stuff, but there's a difference between paying for something that you're obligated to pay because you got something in return, versus going ahead and paying some type of premium. So let's say interest, I will say, is I'm paying for some premium, right? Losing in these gambling cases is I'm paying something for lack of a service. So therefore, in those cases, what we call asmachta lokanya. Even though, again, I say, good hand, right? Shkoyach, really what I'm saying is, well, I don't want to tell you what I'm really saying, right? But lemaisa, therefore it's asmachta lokanya. Therefore, these individuals are rabbinic thieves, and therefore halacha no, not rabbinic thieves. That didn't sound right. Right? They are thieves midrabanan, right? Midrabanan, and therefore halacha lemaisa they are pasalei. So I have to go back and edit that later. So the Gemara says, "I'm Rabbi Yehuda." So we'll say Rabbi Yehuda says, "Emasai." This is fascinating. When is that so? Bisman she'ein lo umnos. So we'll say this is fascinating. When is that so? That these individuals are pasalei eidos. This is only when these things are their primary occupation. What do I do for a living? I'm a gambler, a dove racer, an interest lender. So we'll say when I have no other umnos, then ultimately again, this is when I'm apostle edus. Aval yeshlo umnos shalohi harizeh kasher. But I will say, if I have a regular job, I have a day job, I just dabble in these items. It's not good, to be clear. Chazal frowns upon this all of the time. But lamaisa, if it's not my primary occupation, then halacha lamaisa, again, I'm not apostle edus. So also, I'll just say something very interesting. So the idea, if you look at Rashi says, Bisman she'in lam umnus elahu. So remember, Rabbi Yehuda comes along and says, the only time apostle edus is if this is my primary occupation. Rashi says, the kasar Rabbi Yehuda asmachtu shu nismach al daito, shehu yinatzchenu, valos asmachtu hu matana, or hu masnekanyo. V'lav gazlina ninu upsulai, lefi she'en asukim yishuva sha'olam. The chayvan she'en de makirin u'bekim b'torach, v'tzar b'nei adam einon chasen al chavrei melahafsid mamus. So let's listen to this. The Rashi quotes, the Gemara explains, it's Sanhedrin, discusses why these individuals pasalei. Supposedly the Gemara gives a couple of answers, but the primary answer is lefisha inon oskin b'yeshuvan shel olam, because these people contribute nothing to the fabric of society. If you go ahead and you make your money through gambling or through lending with interest or through racing doves, so we'll say at the end of the day, you're not doing something productive. Halacha l'maisa, you have to make a difference in this world. So how do you make a difference in this world? By having an honest occupation. Whatever you do, you just have to make sure that your job does something to benefit society. These individuals do not benefit society. Now, Rashi ends off and he says something amazing. He says, because these guys don't have regular jobs, therefore, de'in makirin ubekin b'torach b'tzar b'nei adam, so we'll say, they don't understand what it means to earn an honest living. They don't understand what it means to work hard and get a paycheck and make money, and therefore what? Therefore they have no problem taking other people's money. But we'll say, so those who don't understand the value of hard work and don't understand what it takes to earn an honest living have a much easier time taking other people's money. So therefore, again, Rabbi Yehuda goes ahead and he qualifies this statement. V'tani alaba braysa v'chachamim omrim bein she'ein lo omnus Elohi, being sheyesh lo omnos shalohi hareze pasal. So we'll say, watch this, but yet the Chachamim disagree, and the Chachamim say, no, whether you have another job, you don't have another job. If you gamble or if you lend with interest, you are pasal le'edus. So we'll say, why is the Gemara bringing this up? Says that it's fascinating. Here you have Rabbi Yehuda saying B'med Dar Murim. We just said before, whenever Rabbi Yehuda says B'med Dar Murim, what is that coming to do? That's coming to explain, not coming to disagree. Yet we see that clearly there is a machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan. Rabbi Yehuda says the only time these individuals are pasul this is when they have no other occupation, and yet the Chacham are saying no. Even if you have another occupation, even if you just dabble in these things, you are still pasul le'edos. So Rabbi says, so what's going on? To which the Gemara says, Ahid Rabbi Yehuda on Rabbi Tarfoni. This wasn't Rabbi Yehuda's sheet himself, rather this was Rabbi Tarfon. What is Rabbi Tarfon? So what's another fascinating case? This Sanya, I'm Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rabbi Tarfon, Li'olam ein echad mehen nazir. So we'll say, listen to this interesting case. Imagine the following situation. Reuven and Shimon are walking together, and they see another guy, and they see Levi walking towards them. So Reuven says, if Levi's a Nazir, I'm a Nazir. And Shimon says, if Levi's not a Nazir, then I am a Nazir. That's whatever. That's the condition they make. So boy, what's the halacha? neither of them are Nazirim. Right? Neither of them have taken an effective Neder Nazirus. Why? Lefishe Nazirus ela lahafla. Because Rabbi say in order to become a Nazir, you need an explicit articulation. You can't have a conditional articulation, right? Because again, lashon of yafla, an explicit articulation, you can't have a conditional one. Alma, kevan demasafkele Nazir ilo Nazir who lo meshabed nafshe. So we'll say, what do you see from here? That without an explicit articulation, therefore, again, the Neder Nazirus is not chal. So Rabbi Tarfon holds in this case as well. Hachanami, kevan de lo yadi ikani ilo kani lo gamro makna. So we'll say, so what's the problem with gambling? Why is gambling so problematic in the eyes of Chazal? Besides the fact that halacha l'maisa, again, it's not an honest way to earn a living. Why? What's if we all sit down at the table? Because we'll say at the end of the day, when I play that hand, my intention is to win. Right? No one plays to lose. No one plays to lose. And even if people say, I don't mind, I'm willing to lose up to Ezra, no one wants to lose. So because no one wants to lose, Rabbi say, when I do lose and I hand over my money to Ruvain, I'm not handing it over in an explicit way, right? Or I'm not handing it over in a full-hearted way. So the same way Rabbi Tarfon holds by Nazir, that you can't become a Nazir without an explicit articulation. So Rabbi Tarfon says you can't go ahead and escape the clutches of theft unless money is handed over in an explicit, wholehearted fashion. And since in the context of gambling, no one hands over their money in we'll call it an explicit, wholehearted fashion, therefore again, it is considered to be a midrabanan, a form of theft. So therefore I will say, so just plugging this back in, therefore it's not really Rabbi Yehuda who's disagreeing over here, but rather it's Rabbi Yehuda articulating the position of Rabbi Tarfon. So it could very well be that still every time you see Bameh, maybe Bameh really does mean that Rabbi Yehuda is coming to explain the position of the Rabbanon, not coming to disagree. But in the case of the gamblers, it's a disagreement. That's because it's not Rabbi Yehuda, rather it's Rabbi Tarfon. Good. Hadrun Allah Chalon. We'll say Mazel Tov. Mishnah. Ketzad Mishtatzun B'Tchumen. So we'll say, how do you make a shituf? How do you make a shituf? So the Gemara says as follows. So we'll say, so again, remember, this is, I'm sorry, not a shituf, an Erev Tchumen. So we'll say, so in this case over here, you want to make an Erev Tchumen on behalf of a larger group of people. Right? So up until now, we've really focused on an individual making an Erev Tchumen. Here I will say, I want to make an Erev Tchumen for a larger group. So what is that? I will say, I'll tell you just to kind of close this out. So the So the halacha over here just is. Actually, you know what? We'll come back. We'll do a little bit of halacha. Let's get through more Gemara. So Kiz Mishlat Tchumen. So we'll say, how do I make an Erev Tchumen on behalf of a larger group of people? So Maniach Hasachavis, I go ahead and I take a barrel of food, or barrel of wine, whatever it is. So we'll say, so I go ahead and I make the Eruv, and I go ahead and I put the barrel down, and I say, I hereby convey ownership to anyone in my city who wants to go to the base Aval on Shabbos, or go to the base Hamishta, to go to the Simcha on Shabbos. So we'll say, and anyone who has in mind, so we'll say, so I do this on behalf of the city. So any residents of the city who have in mind to participate in this Erev before Shabbos starts, the Erev works for them. However, I will say, but once Shabbos starts, they cannot join in the Erev. Because halacha l'maisa, you cannot go ahead and join in the Erev, ultimately again, once it gets dark, which I will say is something we've seen many times before. Rav Yosef said, so we'll say let's analyze. So we'll say this is a fascinating idea, which it's interesting. We're up to Daf Pei Beis, and we've never seen this concept so far, even though we've spoken extensively about Erev Tchumen, which Rav Yosef says you only have a license to make an Erev Tchumen if you need for a Dvar Mitzvah, which is really very interesting. It is only for a mitzvah purpose that you can make an Erev Tchumen. Really very fascinating. Right? So halacha l'maaseh, again, stam, I want to go ahead and be able to take a walk on Shabbos. You can't make an Erev Tchumen for that purpose. Only l'maaseh, again, for mitzvah purposes. That seems to be explicit in the Mishnah. What did the Mishnah say? Both say it's interesting. Now you begin to see, well, the Mishnah said that explicitly. Because what did I say? I'm hereby making an Erev. Whoever wants to go to the Beis Avel, right? I will say, even though there's no Nichum Avelim per se on Shabbos, but again, I'm going to visit someone who experienced a loss, or the Beis HaMikdash to participate in a simcha of sorts. So those are mitzvah-related items. So we'll say, you would have thought that maybe the Mishnah kind of is just talking in a normative fashion. In other words, the Mishnah is just using these as examples, but lav dafka, that the Mishnah is actually coming to articulate explicit halacha. So the Gemara says, Kamashmalan, no, Kamashmalan, that halacha l'maisa, the only time you could go ahead and make an eruv tchumen is halacha l'maisa for a dvar mitzvah. B'chol shekibel alav mi ba'od yom. So we'll say, interestingly enough, furthermore, the Mishnah said, the only time that the eruv works is when you go ahead and are mekabel the eruv mi ba'od yom, before Shabbos starts. Shamas mina in brera. So we'll say, see from here that there is no such thing as brera. There is no retroactive clarification. Now, remember again, we're familiar with brera. Brera means I make a choice now, and the choice that I make now, it becomes retroactively clarified that choice, quote unquote, was actually made earlier. So why? So we'll say it's clear from the Mishnah that the Mishnah doesn't subscribe to the concept of brera. Why not? The yesh brera tigale muslim afredim yom havanei chale. Because we'll say, watch this. If there was a concept of brera, if we did subscribe to brera, then what could I say? I could say that when I decide on Shabbos to what? To go ahead and utilize that Erev Tchumen. So what should happen? It should be retroactively clarified that I wanted it on Erev Shabbos. Yet the Mishnah says I have to choose to want it on Erev Shabbos. And if I choose to want it on Erev Shabbos, it works. But if I wait till Shabbos itself, it doesn't work. So that appears that there's no Breira. So the Gemara says, no. Amar Rav Ashi hodi'uhu v'lo hodi'uhu katani. So Rav Ashi says, no. But so what it means is like this. You don't have to actively choose that you're going to use the Erev on Erev Shabbos, but you must be actively aware of the Erev on Erev Shabbos. Now, it's actually very interesting. If you did not know about the Erev on Erev Shabbos, and you only find out about the Erev on Shabbos, you can't use it. If you knew about the Erev on Erev Shabbos, and you don't know what your plans are for Shabbos, and then on Shabbos you decide that, you know what, I'd like to go ahead and go to the Beis Mishnah, go to the Beis Evel, so halacha l'maisa again, then you are permitted to go ahead and utilize that Eruv. So we'll say, so look at Rashi. Rashi says, Hodi'u mi ba'od yom v'lo hodi'u katani, Hodi'u afa pishlo nisratzim ba'od yom nisratzim mishachashecha, arminan chovra shekodim zman knias Eruv daita lakachi. So we'll say, so ultimately the Gemara says, no, we do subscribe to Breira, but I will say, remember again, what Breira means is, there's a retroactive clarification that what I know now is extended, or my decision now is extended to an earlier point in time. But you can only say Breira if you were aware of the existence of the Eruv on Erev Shabbos. If you weren't aware of the existence of the Erev on Erev Shabbos, so Breira is inconsequential. Because we'll say, and that indeed is the halacha. So as long as I knew about the Eruv on Erev Shabbos, even if I did not actively choose that I'm going anywhere on Shabbos itself, I can utilize that Eruv on Shabbos. Amar Rav Asi, so the Gemara says, Amar Rav Asi, Katan ben Sheish Yotze be'erev imo. It was an interesting case. A child who is 6 years old. So we'll say it's interesting. So really in this context, 6 years old really means in the 6th year. This is going to become clarified in just a bit. But we'll call 6 years. In the 6th year is Yotze with the erev of his mother, which also means that halacha l'maisa, a child in his 6th year does not require his separate erev, but rather wherever his mother goes, he goes. So whatever erev she makes, she is included in, or he is included in her eruv as well. So the Gemara says, "Meisvei katan shetzarach liimo yotze be'eruv imo, v'she'in tzarach liimo ein yotze be'eruv imo." But one second, we learned elsewhere that it's not as much a function of age as much as a function of maturity. A child who needs his mother ultimately, again, is included in the eruv of his mother. A child who doesn't need his mother has to make his own eruv. To which the Gemara says, "Utanan nami." We learn this also gabi sukkah. Ki agav nakata shein tzarach liimo chay b'sukkah. When a child no longer needs his mother, is chayv in sukkah. Va'avina ba. We asked, what does that mean? Ve'ezo kata shein tzarach liimo. Both say, who is a child who doesn't need his mother? This is very interesting. Amrid Rabbi Yana kol shenifne ve'ein imo makanachto. Any child, will say, who could clean himself up after using the bathroom. It's interesting, right? So essentially, like not just toilet trained, but lamaisi again toilet trained, and could also clean himself up after using the bathroom. Shimon alakish omer kol shener ve'eno karima. It's interesting. Any child who, when he wakes up, doesn't cry out "mami," doesn't cry out "ima." So says the Gemara, "Ima sakadai." Really, is that the litmus test for maturity? Gedolim nanu kari. There are some older children that when they wake up cry "mami," right? So the Gemara says, no. Ella ima kol shener mishnah. So the ino kara ima. We'll say no. There's usually a child who wakes up and calls "mami" until "mami" comes. That's a katan, right? That's a katan shetzarach liimo. Versus the child that wakes up, when he wakes up, might say "mami" or "ima," but lamais again, not constantly crying out until the mother comes. A kama So the Gemara says, and how old is this? Like if you were to assign an age to this, how old is this? Kibar arba, kibar chamesh. So we'll say, very interesting. It's like 4 or 5 years old. So we'll say, so the Gemara is saying that the age of Eino Tzarech Limo, of not needing your mother, is like 4 or 5 years old, or into the 4th year, into the 5th year. So we'll say, obviously, this contradicts what we said before. Right, Ravasi said 6 years old, now we're in the 6th year, now we're seeing the 4th year, 5th year. Amud Beis. Amr Rav Shobri Rav Idi, Ki Kam Ravasi. When did Rav Asi mention his statement about 6 years old, or in the 6th year? Kigon Sheirev Alav Aviv Litzafon V'Ima L'Darom. We'll say that's a case of where the child Baruch Hashem has 2 parents, and we'll say, watch this, his father made an Eruv in one direction, and his mother made an Eruv in another direction. Right? Now, they have a wonderful marriage, don't get me wrong, right? They just, sometimes couples go in different directions. So we'll say, so Lamaisa, now the interesting shaila is, who does the kid go with, right? In other words, obviously you can't have both, right? You can't have an Eruv Tchumen in the north and in the south. So the shaila is, whose Eruv is the kid Mesiachis to which the Gemara says, that even a child in his 6th year is still more comfortable in the presence of his mother. So as I say, interestingly enough, Rav Asi was talking about a situation, Rav Asi was kind of saying the opposite end of the spectrum, that even though, again, technically speaking, a child could reach the age where he, quote unquote, doesn't need his mother anymore, already in the 4th or 5th year, but even up to the 6th year, a child prefers the presence of his mother. So therefore, in a case where 2 parents make 2 Eruvei Tchumen and they go in 2 different directions, we would assign the child to the mother's Tchum because the assumption is that's where he feels more comfortable. Meisir is a kasha. Katan shetzarach limo yotze be'erev imo. So a katan who needs his mother could go ahead and kind of piggyback on her eruv, right? Could go ahead and go with her on her eruv. Ad ben sheish, until the age of 6. Tiyufta Rabbi Yeshua, Barav Idi Tiyufta. So we'll say ultimately again this would seem to refute the position of Rabbi Yeshua Bar Ravidi, because remember again Rabbi Yeshua Bar Ravidi said no, the age is what? 4 or 5. Here you see it's already up to 6. To which the Gemara says Leima Tevet Tiyufta Ravasi. Why wouldn't it also be a refutation of Ravasi? Because after all, again, Ad Ben Sheish means ultimately again up until the 6th year. Ravasi was saying even what? Into the 6th year. To which the Gemara says, Ravasi ad va'ad bichlal. So I'll say again, going back to Brachas days, ad va'ad bichlal means up until and including. When the Brisa says ultimately again up until the age of 6, it means up until and including through the age of 6. So the Gemara says, Leima tevet, you have to do Rabbi Yana Reish Lakish. So shouldn't this also be a refutation of Rabbi Yana Reish Lakish? Lakashya, hadi ise avui b'masa, hadalo ise avui b'masa. So we'll say 2 different cases. One is where the father's in the city, one is where the father is not in the city. And going back to the previous case, so before the parents are making 2 different Eruvin. Good. So we'll say, therefore, halacha l'maisa in machlokes. Here's what we know. We know that the halacha is that as long as a child needs his mother, quote unquote needs his mother, he is included in her Eruv, and by definition need not make any other Eruv. What's the age? So listen to this. So we'll say, so Shulchan Aruch paskins on this, because it's actually, this does have ramifications. So the Shulchan Aruch writes as follows. Katan ben sheish opachos yotze be'erevimo. A katan at the age of 6 years old or less. So 6 and under. Now we'll say, now the Mishnah Berurah comments on that 6 and under means aval nichnas besoch sheva. If you enter into the 7th year. So we'll say, so you understand, right? Meaning, what does it mean enter into the 7th year? Once you turn 6, 6 years old in one day, you're in your 7th year. So pretty much again, the Shulchan Aruch paskins, 6 years old and below is included in the mother's Eruv. Katan ben sheish shanim opachos yotze be'erev imo ve'in tzarech la'aniach alav mazon shtei su'udos liatzmo. So we'll say, halacha l'maisa, a child 6 years old and less is automatically included in the mother's. Lav dafka is just the mother. It's if, for example, if the father was making an Eruv and the mother wasn't making an Eruv, so l'maisa again, the child is included in the parent's Eruv. But interestingly enough, 6 years old and above, the child requires their own Eruv Tchumen. Quite fascinating. Good. So again, the Mishnah Berurah goes through some of the other cases about the father in the city, father not in the city, but ultimately we could just leave that alone. So the Gemara says, so I was supposed to say, just also mention the Shulchan Aruch paskins this idea of ein ma'arvin eruvei tchumen elul dvar mitzvah. We paskin the fact that you can only make an eruv tchumen for mitzvah purposes. Very important. This halacha l'maisa in the Shulchan Aruch. He says, "Kegon shayrotza leilech lebeis ha'evel o lebeis hamishta." But I will say that lashon of beis evel beis hamishta is borrowed from Shlomo Melech in Koheles. Shal nisuin o lahakbil pnei rabo o chaveru sheba min haderech l'yotzi. As well say, I just want to point out, mitzvah purpose kind of has a very a little bit of an expansive definition. In other words, mitzvah purpose doesn't have to be one of the Taryag mitzvos. He gives an example like, I'm going to greet my friend, which is the mitzvah v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. So you could go and realize that. In other words, the idea is that it has to be something purposeful that is rooted in some type of what we'll call good activity. But the example I would give is if I want to take an exercise walk on Shabbos and I want to go ahead and extend my tchum, that you can't do. That has no mitzvah purpose associated with. But anything that has a kind of like even a loose general idea of mitzvah purpose, you can go ahead and extend your tchum par. Kiyotze be'elu. So he goes on, he says, so now listen to this. He says, O sherotze leilech l'tal b'yom tov o Shabbos bepardes, sheyesh bo simcha, b'zeh mikri dvar mitzvah. So the Ramah comments on this, and he says, no, to take a spatzir, right, to take a nice walk, you want to walk in the orchard, and that gives you simcha on Shabbos or Yom Tov. The Ramah actually says that's dvar mitzvah also. So interestingly enough, the Ramah adds in over here, the Ramah says that halacha l'maisa, anything that gives you simcha, that gives you joy, may also be called dvar mitzvah, which is really quite interesting. So pretty much what it means is, as long as you have a purposeful intent in extending the tchum, you're permitted to do so, either because there's a mitzvah, there's a simcha according to the Ramah, and of course, again, the Shulchan Aruch goes on and says, you could of course extend your tchum if there's the potential of danger, right? That's saying because mipnei hayira. Okay, but that indeed is the halacha l'maisa. Good. There's more Shulchan Aruch here, but we'll leave this for now. So much more Shulchan Aruch. Okay, so the Gemara goes weiter. We'll say another case here. Tanabanan. Now that we start talking about the children, so the Brisa says, "Me'ariv adam ayidei b'no bitu aktanim." We'll say a person can make an eruv on behalf of his minor children. Right? So I have young children. I can make an eruv on their behalf, or in other words, even without their knowledge. The Gemara says, "Ayidei avdo v'shivchaso aknanim," or ultimately on behalf of my non-Jewish servants. Right? They can make an eruv on their behalf. Bein l'daiton, bein shelo l'daiton. Whether they know about it, they don't know about it, I can make an eruv on their behalf. Aval inu ma'ariv lo ayidei avdo v'shivchasa ivrim. Now, I will say I can't make an eruv on behalf of my Jewish servants, v'lo ayidei b'no bitu agedolim, or on behalf of my adult children, v'lo ayidei ishto, or for my wife, ela midaitom. So we'll say, which makes sense. So essentially, I can make an eruv on behalf of my minor children. I can make an eruv on behalf of my non-Jewish servants, whether they know about it or they don't know about it. But for my adult children, for my Jewish servants, for my wife, I cannot make an eruv for these parties without their consent, without their knowledge. Tanya idach, another brisa, lo ya'ariv adim ayidei b'no bitu hagidolim. Person should not make an eruv for his adult children, va'ayidei avdo v'shivchasa ivrim, or for my Jewish servants, v'lo ayidei ishto, or for my wife, ela midaiton, without their consent. I need their consent, I need their knowledge in order to make an eruv tchumen on their behalf. Aval ma'arifu ayidei avdo v'shivchaso aknanim, but I can make an eruv for my non-Jewish servants, va'ayidei b'neo bitu aktanim, or for my minor children, bein l'daiton, bein shelo l'daiton. Whether, again, they know about it, they don't know about it. Why? Mipnei sheyadon ki yado. Because their hand is like my hand, which we'll say is another way of saying that these people, right, I have a certain level of shlita. I have a certain level of control over them. So these are my minor children, right? These are my non-Jewish servants. So therefore, again, I have the ability to enter into an eruv tchumen on their behalf, even without their knowledge or consent. V'kulon she'ervu ve'eruv alein rabban. We'll say furthermore again, if any of these individuals, my minor children or my non-Jewish servants, entered into their own eruv tchumen, and I, the master or the father, entered into another eruv tchumen on their behalf, what's the halacha? Yotzin b'shel rabban. Ultimately, again, they are yotze with the eruv of their master / father. Chutz min ha'isha mepnei shechol limchos, with the exception of a wife, because the wife has the ability to object. To which the Gemara says, 1 second, what does that mean? Isha, maishna. We'll say, what do you mean Isha? In other words, why did you suddenly single out a wife? In other words, we'll say, up until now, a wife was included in the category of who? Of adult children, Jewish servants, who are people ultimately, again, with their own decision-making abilities. So now you're making it sound like a wife has the ability to make her own Eruv and only her. To which the Gemara says, no. Amarabba Isha B'chol D'Damila means a wife and everyone like her. Who's everyone like her? Any adult with capacity has the ability to make their own Eruv and cannot be included in the Eruv of a husband/master. I don't mean husband/master, but a husband for the wife, or master, I'm going to be careful, right, or master again for the servants, lamaisa, without their consent. To which the Gemara says, Amar chutz mina isha mipnei, I'm sorry. So the Gemara says, fine. Amar chutz mina isha mipnei sheyechola limchos. Furthermore, a wife is not automatically included in her husband's Eruv. Why? Because ultimately, again, she has the ability to object. Taima demachi. Now, here's what's interesting. So apparently, the reason a woman would not be included in her husband's Eruv is why? Because she objects. Hastama nafka b'debayla. So here's what's interesting. So it sounds like when isn't a wife included in her husband's Eruv? When she objects. But it sounds like if she doesn't object and the husband makes an Eruv on her behalf, then what? What does it sound like? It sounds like it should work. But one second. Hakatani reisha elamidai tam. But yet the reisha said, when could a husband make an Eruv on behalf of his wife? When he has her consent. So we'll say, which one is it? So we'll see, hear the chilik. Does the husband need active consent from his wife in order to include her in the Eruv? Or is her silence enough? Is her silence enough? So it's a fundamental. We have contradictory statements. Because one hand it says that a woman could object to the Eruv, which sounds like the way that she removes herself from her husband's Eruv is through her objection. But yet then it says, so which one is it? Do you need objection? Or so do you need objection? And therefore, again, her silence indicates that she's in, or that no, in order to go ahead and have her buy into the Eruv, or have her be part of the Eruv, you need her active acquiescence. So the Gemara says, my love, the Amri in the ratio, when it said that you need her consent, does it not mean that she says, yes, I want to be part of that Eruv? To which the Gemara says, lo, my elamedaitam, what does it mean, their consent? The ashtiku. So I'll say, no, consent could be silence. That the husband makes an Eruv, assuming the wife knows that he's making the Eruv, and she doesn't object. She's just silent about it. Silence is acquiescence. La fukihecha da amri lo. And therefore, this would come to exclude a case of where she said, no, I do not want to be part of the Eruv. I v'hava kulan she'ervu ve'erev alein rabban yotzim misharabban. Yet also we learned in the Brisa that the Brisa said any time that these individuals made an Eruv, but the husband or the master also made an Eruv, what's the halacha? So it is the master's Eruv, husband's Eruv, which wins out. V'stamahu v'katani chutz min ha'isha delo nafki. Amarav Rava said, no, kevan she'erevu ein lecha michui gadol mizeh. So we'll say, inachinami again, once a woman goes ahead and makes a separate Eruv, we'll say, even if she says nothing, there is no greater objection than that. Obviously, if she's making her own Eruv, it indicates that what? That she does not want to be part of her husband's Eruv. And once she goes ahead and behaviorally exhibits that, halacha l'maisa, again, that clearly, so we'll say, so what it comes out is as follows. Halacha l'maisa, if she knows that her husband is making the Eruv and she's silent, then einachinami, she's part of his Eruv. If she objects, then of course her objection removes her from the Eruv. Or even if she doesn't object, but she creates her own Eruv, halacha l'maisa, again, she is not part of her husband's Eruv. Good. Mishnah, kamihi shiura. So we'll say, how much is the shear? How much is the shear ultimately, again, of the mazon shtei sudos? So we'll say, so remember again, we spoke about this idea that for Eruv Tchumen, one requires mazon shtei sudos. What is the shira mazon shtei sudos? Kamahu shira mazon shtei sudos. I'm sorry, kamu shiro. What is the shir for the eruv? Mazon shtei sudos l'chol echad ve'echad. It is enough food for 2 meals for each and every individual. Mizono l'chol v'lo l'shabbos Reb Meir. But Reb Meir holds that halacha l'maisa, when we speak about enough food for a meal, we spoke about this before. What it means is, it doesn't literally mean 2 meals worth of food. What it means is, you could use any item you want. Remember, we spoke about this before. You can use any food item for Eruv. But halacha l'maisa, it's the amount of that food that you would eat over the course of 2 meals. So let's say, for example, you're using bread. So you're using bread. Simple case. So actually, bad case. Let's say you're using pickles, right? So how many pickles do you have to use for your Eruv Tchumen? Right? So we'll say it's the amount of pickles that a person would eat over the course of 2 meals. What? I'm sorry? A peck of pickles, right? A peck of pickles, good. Hey, so that's the idea. So how many pickles would you eat over the course of 2 meals? That's the amount you need. So it's not 2 meals worth of Eruvin. It's not 2 meals. It's not the Pshat will say that if I was only eating pickles for 2 meals, how many pickles would I eat? It's the number of pickles you would eat over the course of 2 meals. So the Gemara says. But Rabbi Meir says it's Shabbos meals. I'm sorry, it's weekday meals and not Shabbos meals. Rabbi Huda Omer l'Shabbos v'lo l'chol. No. Rabbi Huda says it's. I'm sorry. Rabbi Meir says that it's weekday meals and not Shabbos meals. Rabbi Huda says it's Shabbos meals and not weekday meals. V'zeh miskavnin lahakel. And I will say they both have in mind to be mekel. I will say their machlokias is when do you eat more during a meal? So interestingly enough, Rabbi Meir holds that halacha l'maaseh you eat more during the week than you do for Shabbos. Why would that be? Because Shabbos, since you have an obligation of shalosh this, you don't have an obligation for the third meal, so a person paces themselves a bit more during the week. So when a person doesn't have, I know it's l'maaseh this doesn't play out as well, but during the week where I don't have shalosh this, so a person doesn't pace themselves as well. So on the other hand, Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi Yehuda said that's Rabbi Yehuda says it's Shabbos. Sorry, that was Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds that on Shabbos a person eats less than they do during the week. Rabbi Meir holds that on Shabbos a person eats more because the food is so good. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Roka Omer mikikar bepunyo midal zimisela. Rabbi Yochanan ben Roka says if you're using a loaf of bread, you use a loaf that is a kikar of a pundion. We'll explain this in the Gemara. When you could buy 4 se'in of flour for the seller. Rabbi Shimon Omer shtei yodos the kikar mishalosh lekab. Rabbi Shimon says 2/3 of a loaf. Chetzia lebeis hamenuga. By the way, now that we're talking about loaves, so we'll say it's a half of a loaf is the shear for a home with tzara. So we'll see what this means in the Gemara, but lemaisa, what this means is as follows. Halacha lemaisa, when you go ahead and you walk into a home with tzaras, the moment you walk in, your body becomes tamei. If you go ahead and you wait there, the amount you tarry there for the amount that it takes to consume a half a loaf of bread, halacha l'mais, your clothing becomes tamei as well. We'll see this in the Gemara. V'chatzi chatzia lifsolas hagavia, and a quarter of a loaf, Rabbosai, is enough to go ahead and passel the body. What does this mean? That halacha l'mais, Rashi explains that if a person eats a quarter of a loaf of food, of tamei food, ultimately, again, he becomes tamei to the state that he would eat a quarter of a loaf of tamei food. That would preclude him from going ahead and eating truma afterwards. Right? We'll stop over here. We'll pick up at the Gemara tomorrow. Shkar Chabosai.